All right, well, CNN, heard of them. They like to remind everyone that they are not fake news, Mr. President, but they're going to have to work a little harder if they want people to take them seriously on this one. Lanny Davis, we talked about this last night on the show a little bit. He's walking back last week's claims that his client Michael Cohen was prepared to tell special counsel that President Trump knew in advance about the infamous Trump Tower meeting between his son, Don Jr., and a Kremlin-connected lawyer. Davis also admitted to being the anonymous source behind a CNN report from July that made similar claims. But despite those retractions, a CNN spokesperson told BuzzFeed they're standing by their report. What is CNN thinking here? Let's ask the panel. RNC spokesperson Kayleigh McEnany is here. Hi. Former State Department spokesperson and, hey, I know her. My co-host on Fox News Radio's Benson and Harf, Marie Harf, in the house. And finally, last but not least, correspondent for the Greg Gutfeld Show, Kat Timpf. Hello, ladies.
Hey. Hello.
I am hashtag outnumbered here, as you can tell. I am the only brunette at the table. I think viewers at home immediately picked up on that. So, Kayleigh, I want to start with you. CNN doubling down here, and it strikes me as a bad look, right? Because President Trump sometimes cries fake news, fairly on occasion, unfairly other times. But if they are changing their story, or at least sticking to apparently a wrong story, that sort of fuels Trump and the attacks, right?
That's exactly right, Guy. This is inexcusable behavior from CNN. We know Washington Post has already retracted the story, so has New York Post. But CNN is just releasing this short, kind of terse statement that gives no explanation as to why they are standing by a story that's been debunked. This is outrageous. Perhaps it explains why CNN's lost 35% of their viewers over the last year. And maybe it explains why HGTV, Food Network, and other channels that are not news networks are beating it, and Fox News being at the top.
Well, and let me just say HGTV is tremendous. So
it is very good.
I want to defend the Property Brothers are where it's at. So, Kat, let's talk about this a little bit more. One of the biggest problems that I see here is you can make the case that CNN said that they had multiple sources on that original story, and maybe one of them was Lanny Davis. Another one may have been Michael Cohen. We're not sure. But one of the things in that story that CNN said was that Lanny Davis had no comment, when in fact he did have a comment, because we now know, according to him, he was one of the sources. That seems like a misrepresentation to CNN's viewers. That's a problem, right?
Absolutely, that's a problem. And if they had all these other sources, and let's just give them the benefit of the doubt and say they had all these other sources, it wasn't just him, why not come out and say, hey, we had all these other sources, if that was the case, to try to back up your own reporting? If you're a news outlet, your main goal should be to report accurate news. That's kind of what you do, or what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to just report news that in a way that you want in terms of the own slant that you're trying to project, and not correct it when you've clearly made a mistake. And if you haven't made a mistake and you did have other sources, say so, but they're not saying so.
Yeah, and Marie, that strikes me as the heart of the problem here. Now the public knows for a fact, based on Lanny Davis's apology, that he was the source, he was wrong, or at least a source, he was incorrect, and they're just digging in their heels and saying, we stand by the story, we're totally fine. If they continue to stick with that line, do they fall into the fake news trap? And doesn't it make real news harder to break through, because the White House can rightly point to this as an example of dishonesty?
Well, Guy, I think there's one way we can solve whether Donald Trump knew about this meeting and whether Lanny Davis was right or not, and Donald Trump can sit down with Bob Mueller and answer that question under oath. So I think what we all care about is whether he knew, whether it's true or not. CNN is indicating that they did have multiple other sources. If they did, as Kat said, they need to be very clear about that. I don't think we should say just because Lanny Davis has retracted this, there's no chance it's true. There's a chance it's true. There's a chance it's not. CNN, I think, needs to look. They get a lot of criticism. I think a large majority of it very unfair. I've also said that CNN and other media outlets need to do even better because they're under such a microscope. They need to cross every T, dot every I. And if there are questions here about Lanny Davis as a source, I think they need to be very clear about what they know and what they don't. And if there's a problem here, address it publicly. But the real issue is, did Donald Trump know? And he can answer that very easily.
On the CNN piece, shouldn't they at least update their story to say that one of their top sources has retracted the entire claim?
Sure. Yeah. And if there are other sources, they can keep that in there. But again, the underlying question, did Donald Trump know or not? Donald Trump can answer that better than Lanny Davis.
Well, and he has answered. He said he doesn't know about it. He said that publicly. And the fact is, Michael Cohen testified under oath both before and after the CNN story, saying that he did not know about the meeting and had no information. The CNN story is entirely undermined. They need to be transparent here because they're just contributing to the fake news narrative, and they will be shouted at a lot more at rallies, I guarantee you.
All right, we'll leave it there for now. The panel returning a bit later, but first, John McCain's passing leaves Arizona's governor with a tough decision. We'll take a look at candidates potentially vying to fill McCain's Senate seat. Plus, is media coverage of the Trump-McCain feud, even after McCain's death, making everything worse? Dana Perino is here next. All right, meanwhile, Google is, quote, suppressing conservative voices. That's according to the president, who slammed the tech giant on Twitter this morning, and then he said this in the Oval Office.
I think Google is really taking advantage of a lot of people, and I think that's a very serious thing, and it's a very serious charge. We have literally thousands and thousands of complaints coming in, and you just can't do that. So I think that Google and Twitter and Facebook, they're really treading on very, very troubled territory.
Google denying any sort of bias today, saying in a statement, you can read it there, search is not used to set a political agenda, and we don't bias our results toward any political ideology. This issue has been on everyone's radar due to a series of recent events, including social media giants' decision to censor bonkers conspiracy theorist Alex Jones. Also, tech executives are expected to testify on Capitol Hill in a couple weeks. So is there any basis to the president's accusations? Our panel is back, Kayleigh, Marie, and Kat. All right, Kat, let's start here. What's the president talking about with this Google stuff, and does he have a point?
I don't work at Google, so I don't know the inner workings of Google. What I do know is it bothers me when he says, for example, he also tweeted about this, and he said, we'll address it. That bothers me. I don't want the government to get involved in media whatsoever. One of the great things about this country is that we have a free press where the press is completely independent of the government. You can say as many negative things about the government or people in power as you want to say, and you're not going to get your head chopped off. In other countries, people aren't so lucky. They get their heads chopped off. Now, I'm not saying that Trump would chop people's heads off, but I don't think the government should be getting involved at all. If it is a thing, then he can complain about it, because that's his right of free speech to complain about it. But I think that it's so important that our media stays completely independent of the government. I would also abolish the FCC.
All right, Marie, I know you're dying to defend the president on this one, so go ahead.
Well, there's no evidence that Google is doing what he claims they're doing. And the fact that the president was awake at 5 a.m., Googling himself, he said, Google Trump news, and here's what I just got. I mean, if we had a friend who was up at 5 a.m. Googling themselves and then tweeting about it, we'd be like, hey, maybe it's time to, like, take some NyQuil and sleep a little longer. This is not what the president should be focused on. This is not what the president should be spending his time on, especially because there's zero evidence that Google impacts their searches based on political ideology. We've talked a lot about Facebook and Twitter. They have separate issues. They've talked about those publicly. They'll be up on Capitol Hill, as you said, in the coming weeks. Google is different. I think he was just mad that when he Googled himself, it wasn't great news coming up. That's not bias. That's what's in the news today.
Kayleigh, is there any evidence here?
Yeah, there absolutely is. You know, there's a lot of speculation. The president read a PJ Media study. She did a cursory search and found 96% negative toward President Trump. But also in her piece, she references a more advanced study by a company that works with search engine technology that examined 1,000 URLs and found, in fact, that 40% of the time, if you Google something like abortion, you're going to get a left-leaning opinion, 40 times more likely to get a left-leaning opinion. So there is some evidence out there. It does need to be looked into, and especially when aggregated. I know you said it's separate from Facebook and Twitter, but we're really concerned at the RNC about Facebook and Twitter. We sent a letter. They never responded to our letter enumerating multiple grievances, and instead we found out that our chairwoman had been blocked by Twitter, at least with the search function that auto-populates.
Right.
So
they did fix that. Twitter did address that pretty quickly. Meanwhile, let's talk trade. Canada's foreign minister arrived in Washington just a few hours ago to resume trade talks following President Trump's ultimatum to our friendly neighbors up north. The president reached a new trade deal with Mexico yesterday and threatened Canada with tariffs on car exports if they didn't hop on board. The Trump administration is giving Canada until Friday to hash out a deal. So, will the president's tactics work? And is the Mexico deal a winner for Americans? Marie, I'll start with you.
Yeah.
I asked this to Adrian Elrod last night, another Democrat. If the president does work out a better deal for the American people here with our North Korean partners, will Democrats give him credit?
North American partners, not North Korean.
North American partners, thank you.
That was a little Freudian slip.
Well, we've got that later in the show.
Yeah.
We're getting to North Korea, too.
I was going to say we have a trade deal with North Korea. That's great news. Look, I think if it's a good trade deal that's good for American workers, American farmers, American businesses, we are happy to look at it and give it the thumbs up. We don't have details yet about the Mexican trade deal. There's no Canadian trade deal yet. And it's still an open question whether we'll get one. I'm glad they're negotiating. I'm glad they haven't ripped up NAFTA yet. The wild card politically, though, Guy, is that anything will have to go through Congress. And Congress seems to be able to get very little done, particularly before the election. So I think that we need to wait and see. I'm certainly open to looking at any trade deal the president might negotiate that's good for our country, good for our workers. And I've also said repeatedly, as you know, these trade wars with Mexico, with Canada, with the EU, these are not helpful to the economy. We're already seeing the impact of these tariffs playing out. So if he can solve this, I'm definitely open to seeing the details of that.
Kayleigh, there are reports that the White House and the administration are trying to get some Democrats on board, like Sherrod Brown, who's very liberal, labor unions as well. Should Republicans be concerned that the White House seems to be vying for Democratic votes because they might not have enough Republican votes?
I don't think so, because this is a win for our party, no matter which way you look at it. If it's Democrats that ultimately come on board to help push this over, it still has President Trump's name on it. He's the one who initiated it. He's the one who negotiated it. And he is the one who has siphoned off blue-collar workers from the Democrats and made the GOP the party of blue-collar workers that can now win Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, states Republicans hadn't won since the 80s. So at the end of the day, all I care about, all the president cares about, is that this gets done. He reportedly goes into these trade meetings and will say, how can I create jobs using trade policy? And that is the kind of attitude that's a winning one.
Kat, is getting anything done better than getting nothing done if the thing is not good, or not better than NAFTA, for example?
In general, I'm not the biggest fan of tariffs because I believe that they are a tax on the American consumer because, in fact, they are a tax on the American consumer. Talking about placing tariffs on Canada, I think, is not really a good plan, especially when you think about the fact that a lot of the vehicles that are made in Canada, they use components that are built in the United States. So that could affect the American worker as well. So I think that I don't think any deal would be better if it's a bad deal, but I think we need to be really, really careful. And I know it can be fun to kind of threaten Canada and say, hey, because it would obviously be a disaster for Canada if we were to impose tariffs on Canada as well. But think about the fact that it could also have negative effects on the American workers here. So even if you are America first, you really need to think twice about doing something like this.
All right, ladies, thank you very much for your time tonight. Really appreciate it. Fun panel. Yes. We'll have you all back when Kennedy's back in this chair. Yeah. Meanwhile, coming up, a new poll suggests voters are siding with President Trump and his decision to revoke former CIA Director John Brennan's security clearance. Plus, the Pentagon says U.S. war games may resume on the Korean Peninsula. Yeah, I told you we're going to get to Korea. What does that mean for the hopes of peace with Kim Jong-un? Mike Baker joins me next.